this cluster of topics, as we move together looking at the human dimensions of organizational work, we have so far covered different topics which include concerns of recruitment, selection, skill formation and redeployment. We have looked at concerns of developing leaders, developing teams. But one of the key concepts still needs to be conveyed, handled for a proper understanding of the human element in work situations, and that is the concept of motivation. So, we are going to spend some time trying to understand this much used word, but very often misunderstood, because the broad contours of its operations are never quite clear. How it works is perhaps best conveyed anecdotally from drawing upon the analogies, stories, descriptions in the folklore, from the epics, from collective memories, so that it strikes a chord with all listeners, and yet at the same point of time illustrates what is sought to be conveyed. Let us take a fallback to an episode in Mahabharata, where there is almost a duel like situation between Karna and Arjun, both of them ace archers of their times, brothers with the same kind of pedigree, the same kind of valor, and that was going to be a fight to death. They had spent a lifetime competing, battling, referring to each other, and here was the final call. As people are aware, the charioteer for Arjun was Krishna, and Krishna had so arranged that the charioteer for Karna was Shikhandi. Now, Shikhandi was from the neutral gender, a fallout of situations under the karmic law, and the details of which are not relevant. But soothsayer had it that in the final reckoning, the wheel of Karna's chariot will sink into the ground, so that Karna could not defend himself, and that is the way in which Karna will meet his end. So, the battle begins, and to cut a long story short, after various maneuvers, in the heat of the exchange of attack and counter attack, Karna's wheel of the chariot sinks into the ground, and he asks Shikhandi, the charioteer, to move the wheel from being stuck, and of course, Shikhandi will not have any of it. So, Karna himself gets down to push the wheel out of the ground, and to push the wheel out of the ground, he is left defenseless. In fact, he has to focus energies on pushing the wheel, and as he is pushing the wheel, as tutored by Krishna, Shikhandi inflicts the vilest of demotivating statements on Karna, reminds him of the origin, humble according to the popular lore, as a chariot driver's son, calls him supine, worthless, incapable of fighting Arjun, and saying, this is destiny, now your wheel is caught up in this mud. And Karna, instead of focusing on pushing the wheel out of the ground, gets diverted. So, what could have been achieved in n units of time gets multiplied gets almost squared, tripled, and Karna is extremely disturbed by these invectives, and as he applies his shoulders to the wheel, pushing it harder and harder, taking longer and longer, Arjun gets the time, and how he handled the situation is another story, but it is not relevant to the point which is sought to be made here. He showers arrows upon Karna, and that is how Karna meets his end. Technically speaking, Karna was quite in a position to position himself behind the wheel, to be out of the line of the showering of the arrows which Arjun would inevitably undertake, and with sufficient motivation and encouragement he could have pushed the wheel out of the ground. That was not to be. That is motivation. People are affected by the way they are treated by others, and people are affected by the way they move themselves. And it is generally recognized that in work situations, you get better task performance if you are motivating others to perform, and others are motivated to perform. But if the matter was as simple as that, then all you have to learn is to offer a few words of encouragement to the people around you and people reporting to you or people above you. And all you have to do is feel a sense of enthusiasm and operation, and the act is on. In actual life, it is a very complicated process. Therefore, the topic understanding motivation. Encouraging of others is a very subtle activity, which must be at the wavelength at which the person affected operates. For example, if a person is motivated by material gains, you can't motivate him by giving him good food or pleasing his senses. If a person is motivated by recognition, you can't motivate him by giving money. In other words, very much like in an electronic system, the system which transmits and the system which receives must be at the same wavelength, and if it is not at the same wavelength, it is not going to work. And if it is not going to work, you have trouble at your hand, you have neither understood motivation nor are you in a position to operate it. Hopefully, the elaboration which we will share through this discussion, presentation, will help you to understand motivation, to see it in managerial terms and operate it, and not just in psychological terms, because motivation at the end of the day is a psychological term. As the demography of the employees are changing, the employees' motivation has become more and more challenging. So, after a brief background on motivation, what I am sharing with you is an introduction to the concerns of motivation which are important in understanding it. Every organization has a new breed of employees. And in the words of Tennyson, the old order changeth, yielding place to new. And of course, Tennyson goes ahead to say, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one custom corrupt the world. But for our purposes, the focus here is on the old order changeth and yielding place to new. And if you have yielding place to new of one system being replaced by another, you can take it that you are now, like every other period in time, going to have yet another new generation of employees. Now, every generation was a new generation at its point of time. Every generation aged and every generation got phased away. The wise know that these are cyclical concepts. But in this day and age, as we talk to each other today, when you talk of the new generation of employees, you are talking of the characteristics of the new generation which is entering the world today in this phase. And what is the defining characteristic of the new generation of employees? That is a difficult task to respond to, but it has to be attempted. With increasing presence of a new generation, a substantial change in expectations is taking place. The expectations of the new generation of employees are substantially different from the expectations of the old generation of employees, and the new generation today is known to be more ambitious, known to be more prone towards the luxuries of life, known for expecting quick returns, and is a generation in a hurry. This is seminal to understanding motivation, because if you want to motivate an employee, you have to respond to him at the level of his expectations, and this is where understanding motivations becomes a little bit of tricky affair and therefore needs a little bit of time. The primary focus of the new employee seems to be, am I heard? Do I matter? The new employee wants to matter. The new employee wants to be heard, not in a cosmetic sense of being given a hearing. In a real sense, he wants to be a participant of the decision making process. Not so long ago, the seniors had that position, and what they ruled was law. Therefore, when that generation was the new generation of employees, what moved them was essentially different from what moves the employees today. Hence, the need to understand motivation. The new generation sees manager as a friend and as a mentor. He does not see the manager as a boss in the conventional sense of giving commands and demanding compliance. People do not like commands anymore. They may acquiesce because of a career need, but there is not that sense of enjoyment. To continue it, therefore, there are changes in the aspirations of people, and a new set, a new mindset has entered the workplace. The new mindset treats oneself as a brand. He is very proud of the way he does his work. Does not matter if sometimes it is not in synergy with the work requirements. It shows itself on the way he wants to dress, it shows itself on the way he wants to distribute his time, it shows itself on his unique style of receiving feedback, it shows itself on the way he wants technology to reduce his own commitment to itemized tasks. He also recognizes his own need to evolve. And of course, he is not to say, I work hard, I party harder. He wants to indulge himself, he wants to enjoy himself, a very hedonistic approach. Now, you can't be value judgmental about this. You can't be looking down the nose because you didn't have these opportunities at that age. On the other hand, as the new brand of employee, when you enter an organization, you better be conscious that you may want to party hard, but your boss was never born in a generation to party hard. And therefore, he does not understand hedonism. In fact, he is a workaholic. He comes early, leaves late. He believes tasks should be given at times with the smallest time allocation to it. And when you argue with him, he says, am I not working myself in the same way? Am I expecting something which I do not do myself? He needs to realize that he may be working in a certain manner, but the new employee is not going to find it easy to agree, and vice versa is also true. If the new employee is not going to come to grief, the new employee has to realize that the motivating factor of the senior employees may be substantially different to the motivating factor of the newer employees. In fact, the newer employee may want to party hard, the older employee may just want to take home a little bit of peace, which will help him to cope better with the problems of life at his point of time in age. Hence, motivation becomes the mediating variable for effectiveness amongst different groups of people, and people must realize that in order to work with each other, they need to comprehend the motivating factors for each other. For effective employee motivation, organizations need to change their strategy. The strategy which is perhaps worth considering is, can you create people as brands? In other words, can you incorporate the aspiration of the individual into a strategic perspective? Can you offer achievement to evolve? In other words, again, can you link up the individual aspiration with the organizational strategy? And finally, if the individual aspiration is, I work hard, I party hard, can you convert the workplace in a fun place? No, that is bound to evoke emotions at different generations and with different people. I do not want to enter into that debate, because then the argument would be, what is a fun place and what is the obligation to make work fun? You are getting a livelihood, You better come to work, do your work, go home. Now, this is not the place where these debates can be resolved, but this is the place where the debate can be stated, so that you understand what the nuances are for understanding organizations in their dimension of motivation. There are certain myths about motivation, and I would like to work you through some of them, so that you understand motivation stripped of its warp and woof and its superficial realities. The first myth is the belief that I can motivate people. This is a myth. There is a lot of social science theory is that no one can motivate anyone. In fact, offering words of encouragement may themselves fail, because they may not be actually touching the chord of the motivational roots of the person you are dealing with. So, how do you handle motivation? Motivation is when a person motivates himself. Therefore, operationally, in managerial terms, it means pushing a person to a point where he wants to work harder. He believes that working harder is a fulfilling process, and in results of his work he gets satisfaction. So, he must start motivating himself. Employees have to motivate and empower themselves. Therefore, they all look for spaces. Managers can set up an environment where they best motivate and empower employees. Therefore, managerial role function now has focused on creating the environment. In creating the environment, you have a situation where, as a manager, you are doing your bit for performance, and yet you are not actually assuming that you can motivate people. You can create the set of circumstances where people motivate themselves. Talent lies in knowing how to set up the environment for each of your employees. So, the myth is I can motivate people, and the reality is this is what you can do, or this is what happens. Another myth is that money is a good motivator. Certain things like money, a nice office, a nice security can help people from becoming less motivated. Please notice what I am saying. Money, a nice office, job security can help people from becoming less motivated, but they usually do not help people to become more motivated, and I am sure you get the emphasis and you get the nuances to understand where I am coming from. You can create circumstances where people become motivated at the same level. Their motivation does not recede, but you can't create circumstances which raise the level of motivation. These are two different directions of movement of motivation. A key goal is to understand the motivation of each employee, and as a superior officer, this is a task which you cannot skip. Myth number 3, fear is a damn good motivator. The truth is, fear is a great motivator, but for a very short time. You yell at a person, you shriek at a person, you terrify him, you put him in a situation where he starts wondering, am I going to keep the job or am I going to lose it? And very soon he becomes immune to it. Then he starts believing, okay, let him try, I will see what going to go out of this. So, fear is a damn good motivator is a myth. It works for a short time. That is why a lot of yelling from the boss won't seem to let a spark under employees for a long time. Myth number 4, I know what motivates me, so I know what motivates my employees. You are making an error there. Something may motivate you, it may not motivate your employee. This is not a situation where what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. The gander may want a very different kind of a sauce altogether. So, this is a myth which is not really true. It is a myth. It is a statement which is not really true. It is a myth. Different people are motivated by different things. I may be greatly motivated by earning time away from my job to spend more time with my family. Somebody else may be more motivated by recognition of a job well done. In one case, the motivation is to get back to the family. In another case, the motivation is to earn recognition, to target excellence and be recognized for the excellent skills which you have. The motivational source there are totally different. Therefore, the key goal is to understand what motivates each of your employees. Take it from the point of view of a person who is a new entrant to the situation. If he is involved enough and if he is literate enough, he knows what motivates him and therefore will help his superior to understand his motivations. And in assisting the superior to understand the motivations, he may be working towards a goal which both seek to achieve, but the superior does not know the route to take. This creates a synergistic relationship. This creates a relationship where it is important to recognize that yes, there are certain leverages of motivation and they are specific to the person, but can the person affected be take the lead to convey to the people who would wield the leverages, to apply the leverages at the point where it works for him. And for that, a principle of behavioral sciences becomes very, very relevant. Interventions which produce positive results are repeated. Therefore, if you are subtle enough, you could drive the boss up the lane to a point where he recognizes, yes, when I talk this way, when I do this, when I offer this, my colleague responds. There is yet a fifth myth of motivation. Increased job satisfaction means increased job performance. It does not follow. Increased job satisfaction does not necessarily mean increased job performance. From the Tavistock experiment, this has been known. In fact, for a group of telephone operators, when the lighting was approved, the seating was improved and the conditions of job performance were improved, the actual performance declined. Now, that is another story which we can't get into, but what I would like to do is to conclude this part of the discussion by pointing out that if the goals of the organization are not aligned with the goals of the employees, then the employees are not effectively working towards the mission of the organization. And if they are not effectively working towards the mission of the organization, then you have a problem at hand. So, job performance and job satisfaction may not be totally congruent. It has to do with the motivational factors. Let us walk through some of the basics of motivation, which will therefore naturally end in better understanding of motivation. Motivating people starts with motivating yourself. Now, this means that instead of pointing a finger at the other person, you should turn your finger and point to yourself. In fact, to gesture it and to show it to you, instead of going this way, you need to turn this way. Motivate yourself. Once you are motivated, that may prove infectious. Do not say you do this. In other words, managing self in a proactive way, in an effective way, is very often a good way of motivating others. And to go back to what I have already presented to you, in creating the environment for achievement. It is amazing how if you hate your job, it seems like everyone else does too. If you love your job, then you begin to believe that everyone else would also love his job, provided the conditions are there for it. If you are very stressed out, it seems like everyone else is too. You tend to create a mirror image wherever you go. If you are enthusiastic about your job, it is much easier for others to be too. So, enthusiasm is the key. Positive emotions are the key. The key to supporting the motivation of your employees is understanding what motivates each of them, which means whatever steps a manager takes to support the motivation of the employees, they should first include finding out what is it that really motivates each of your employees. And at the level of the enterant, it is important for the enterant to make sure he is facilitating that understanding. Recognize that supporting employees' motivation is a process, not a task. Just when you think you have understood what motivates an employee, the next time you try it, it does not work, because his mood may have changed. And human beings are complex entities. Human beings have different motivating elements at different points of time. This can be variable in terms of age, it can be variable in terms of mood, it can be variable even in terms of the time of the day. In fact, it can be a variable of the whole set of endocrinal flows in an individual. Therefore, when faced with a situation, be clear that you do not rush into it, but you take a little time to assess what it is that we are in right now and what kind of temperament is the other person displaying. Typically, do not try to convince somebody when the other person is angry or upset. So, organizations change all the time, as do people. An important point to remember. Indeed, in an ongoing process to sustain an environment wherever each employee can strongly motivate themselves, there are certain steps which need to be needed. If you look at sustaining an employee motivation as an ongoing process, then you will have to be much more fulfilled and motivated yourself. A dissatisfied employee will find it 3 times as difficult to motivate somebody else if he can do it at all. In fact, it is a truism that one has to recognize the need to first manage one's self before one can manage others, and that requires a lot of effort. So, basics of motivation require the need to understanding your own motivation, changing as it may be, in varying ratios as it may be, and then listening to the messages which the other person is giving and responding to it. People as business partners respond better to motivational deals. Today, human resources is increasingly becoming a business partner. You manage human resources by making another person a partner and not necessarily treating that person as somebody quite inferior. Now, this again is consistent with the traditional Indian knowledge and traditional Indian learning. Forget a work situation. A subhashit or a good statement in Indian ethos is Shodash Varsheshu Prapteshu Putra Mitra Mivacharet. At the attainment of the age of 16, treat your son as a friend. Shodash 16, Varsheshu years, Prapteshu on achievement, Putra, that is son, which means a daughter also here, because masculine in Sanskrit grammar means also the feminine, and that is a grammatical law, it is not a gender bias. Putra mitra miva, like a friend, acharet. If that is true of a genetic relationship, how much must it be true of a work relationship? Motivating employees is getting increased attention because it is clear that the cost of replacement of talent is much higher than the cost of retention. Now, this is a very important business principle, which links up with the issues of recruitment, selection and the works. Motivating is not just to create a better work culture, motivating is also a financial connotation. The emerging sources of motivation are employees' engagement, training, development, building internal capability, and this is a very important statement, because if creating the climate in the work situation is important, not only should the superior person know it, but the person who is in a reporting relationship also needs to understand that he must be open to creating an engagement with work situation. He must be open to receiving training and development, and he must contribute towards building an internal capability architecture. In other words, quite simply, everything is a two-sum game. If the realities are changing, therefore, it follows that employee motivation is a subset of changing realities. Every situation has a tendency to promote people before their time, provided it is a paying proposition for the collective. If everyone gains by somebody's promotion, nobody's promotion would be held back. But this initiative will not go the full length. In some cases, employees are required to wait longer for their promotion, so that only the professionals with proven managerial skills can lead project teams, and people are very reluctant to wait. Now, how do you trade a balance between promoting people who have a potential, and therefore promoting them will have dividends for the organization, and standing in the way of promoting people till their ability is proved? because here there is a catch in placement. Certain people may not perform so well at certain levels, but they perform much better at other levels. So, the skill lies in getting people to levels where they can perform. So, this has to do with positioning of people at a certain point in organization. Certain people perform so much better when they are in a leadership situation, and certain other people are so miserable when they cannot express themselves, and the misery shows itself in many ways. In the case of certain organizations, employees' progress depends upon multiple criteria, including experience, previous appraisal, consistency of performance, especially in certain progressive IT companies. This mix is known to work. Therefore, promotion as a motivating factor is a derivative of mixing together different elements, and usually it includes multiple criteria. The triangular relationship of employee, direct manager and HR is a key to building and preserving a harmonious industrial relations environment. This needs to be internalized. There is the designated superior, there is the employee concerned, and there is the HR department, the human resources department, who handles rules, regulations, the conditionalities, the benefits. So, to get real motivation, it is a tripartite relationship, not just a dual relationship. Very often this relationship becomes a victim to high pressure business priorities, cost effectiveness and rapid expansion. It is for organizational superiors to make sure that, be it high pressure business priorities, cost effectiveness and rapid expansion, does not become a casualty of a lack of recognition of the tripartite nature of a performance triangle. Doors must be left open for communication, because absence of communication can create serious issues. Lack of trust and breakdown of fundamental one-to-one relationship ensures that organizations will not work. There are 4 drivers of motivation. Let us go back to it, and I will link it up from the beginning. So, let us get each one of the blocks in place one by one. Drive to acquire, drive to bond, drive to learn and drive to defend. These are 4 drivers of motivation. Drive to acquire works through drive to keep objects and experiences. It is the basis of hierarchy and status, the basis of keeping objects and experience is based on hierarchy and status. Drive to bond is drive to form relationships and social commitments. The basis is social identity. The drive to learn is drive to satisfy curiosity and resolve conflict and conflicting information. So, it works on 2 wheels of responding to curiosity and resolving conflicting information. That is where drive to learn becomes a motivating factor. The drive to defend works on 3 principles: the need to protect ourselves, reactive not proactive drive, and the basis of fight or flight of this choice. Now, drive to acquire, drive to bond, drive to learn, drive to defend is the key to a person's self-motivation factors. The organization and the superior has to make sure that these conditionalities are fulfilled, and that is how you understand motivation, that is how you use it. So, motivation, like any other sentiment in managerial action, is a multivariate concept, multi-layered concept, differentiated concept, working in a dynamic mode, and that is complexity incarnate. Ultimately, handling motivation based on scientific inputs remains an art. The psychological contract with contractual labor is often a driving force. The contract workman, which is to raise the discussion to another level altogether, often suffers from a feeling of inadequacy and constant deprivation as compared to the regular employee. Why do we need to bring in contractual labor and contractual workmen in such a situation? We need to bring in because progressively outsourcing and contracting and subcontracting is becoming the pattern of running organizations, and they become an integral part of organizational success or organizational failure. So, earlier on, whereas you were dealing only with regular employees, now you are dealing with advisors, you are dealing with contract workers, you are dealing with people who do not see themselves in a relationship with the organization on a permanent basis. In fact, they do not even see themselves in a permanent relationship with the contractor who has brought them into the work situation, because they know they can be removed by that person and another substitute can be brought. Therefore, in this continuous situation of transition, the use of motivation principle becomes subtle and somewhat complex. In fact, a line of thought says that the contract workman should not be viewed as a group of people who are being employed and engaged to reduce employment or overhead costs. They should be treated with respect. And so, the discussion goes on. The moment an organization creates a divide between fellow workmen of employee and contractors or contractual workers, you have a problem at hand. So, what is it that really moves an organization, and where all would be the inputs for motivation? Well, the inputs would come from 4 stakeholders: the government, the employers, the employees, and the society. So, what one is saying is, all these 4 need to seriously revisit and reorient themselves in handling sensitive issues, especially of motivation. The government needs to see how they can create an environment sufficiently propitious where people are motivated to work. The employers seem to have a need to ask similar questions. The employees, on their turn, would also need to be asking themselves, what can I do to make my workplace sufficiently motivated for me and for others, even at a peer level? And the society needs to have similar posers to them. So, motivation is essentially creating productive work environment, and we are going to look into these aspects progressively, but first a quick run which will need to be explained with a little more time. Human relations professionals need to take an inward look at the health of the employee management relationships and refocus efforts on making it a priority. This is seen as unglamorous HR work, but nevertheless an essential part of the work, and it is this that is the very core of motivating employees and creating productive work environment. We are going to stop there for now and revisit all this to build it up into a viable framework of understanding motivation. Thank you for now.